Hey now, what is up everybody? My name is Mike Brown, aka ReviewKingMB, and we're getting close. We're getting very close to the end. Unfortunately, the end of my 31 days of horror movie reviews, and I decided to do kind of a random movie, but it's a movie that I have watched just now for the very first time. Monster Squad. Yes, The Monster Squad is a 1987 film that was directed by Fred Decker. He co-wrote the movie, but it was also co-written by Shane Black. Now the plot is 100 years ago, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Gillman, they've all been rounded up, and exactly 100 years later, they are almost summoned to come back and terrorize to take over the world. Now, just then, these couple kids, we have Sean Crenshaw, Patrick, Eugene, and Horace, aka Fat Kid, and also Sean's little sister, Phoebe. They have to stop this. The fate of the world is in the hands of a bunch of young kids. Imagine that. And these young kids, they're not only fans of monsters, study monsters, they've watched the movies and whatnot, but they call themselves the Monster Squad. Now, what I think of the Monster Squad was, this movie was very interesting. I will have to say that overall I did enjoy the movie. It was a lot of fun, and I mean, it's written by Shane Black, so I should have known how much humor would have been in there, but I think for the most part the humor works. I'm not saying that I laughed at every single joke, but for the most part these kids are pretty amusing, pretty entertaining. Just them talking smack about their teacher and how she looks like a cat, or just them talking to each other and making fun of the old German man that lives down the street. And just certain things that they would say to each other. They curse sometimes. Like, I like these kids. I will say that Horace, the fat kid, I only felt a little bad for him, but I will admit the two bullies who were making fun of him, they were so, I guess, clever in their way of making fun of him. How they pretend to have a microphone and they were like interviewing him like, "Fat kid, why do you eat so much?" Maybe they were just trying to really like watch his weight and help him out. It wasn't until when they grabbed this comic book and ripped the comic book to where I said, wow, that's fucked up. Then I hated them. But then that's when the older kid, Rudy, shows up. And he's the cool kid. He's wearing the leather jacket and sunglasses. He's the older kid, so obviously these bullies would be afraid of him. And he comes in, helps this kid out, and he actually wants to be a part of this Monster Squad. Look, how much does he really care about this Monster Squad? He is older. It's not really probably the top thing on his mind, but I did like him. He did have a cool vibe about him. And Phoebe is the sister of Sean, and I actually felt bad for this little girl because I liked her. She was cute and she was funny. She would say things that made me laugh, but they were kind of mean to her and always kicking her out of the tree house, and that was a pretty sweet tree house. I admit, I always wanted a tree house like that when I was a kid. I never got one, but at least I can see a movie and imagine what that would be like. Now, let's talk about these monsters. The monsters that this movie is all about. Obviously, Dracula. He's the leader. He's the original. Everybody knows Dracula just because. It's almost like you can't explain like how you first became aware of Dracula, or what was the first thing you would see him in or hear of him, but it's ingrained in our mind. So seeing this version of Dracula, he's the leader. He's the one, in a sense, rounding everybody up, getting ready to, I guess, take over the world. There was points when he was a little silly, I guess, but there was other points where he did come off scary and creepy and dark and ominous and really seeming like an actual threat, like a factor. Especially Sean's father is a detective. He's a cop. Him and his partner, very Lethal Weapon like their scenes, of course, Shane Black. And the father, I did like how much he was involved in that. It wasn't long before he figured out what was going on and he got in there. But the moment when he was trying to shoot at Dracula right in front of his house and the bullets just, I guess, went through him or didn't affect him, that was when Dracula completely came off badass, blew up the car. Like Dracula, again, he had his moments. Frankenstein's monster. Dracula tells him to go and kill the kids if you have to get the book, Van Helsing's book. And Frankenstein's monster, he really doesn't even, for a second, goes along with this. As soon as he meets the kids, he instantly becomes their friend. And it was a little cheesy, a little silly and goofy, just how Frankenstein's monster was acting with them, and the little girl was teaching them words. But it was fine. It was cute. It was what it was. You have Gillman, who was never really a creature that I was hugely familiar with. I heard of him, and when I saw him come out of the lake, I'm like, oh, okay, he looks familiar. Although I would have much preferred like Swamp Thing or something. But Swamp Thing, I guess, isn't a villain. I don't know. Gillman just looks very weird, very goofy and silly. The Mummy, who, like, when you see some of these older creatures, he's just a dead body wrapped in essentially what? Toilet paper. I mean, it's funny. It is. But the Wolfman. The Wolfman is played by Jonathan Grise, who I just got done rewatching and reviewing Fright Night Part 2, and he is in that movie as a werewolf. So, and I talked about in that review how much I couldn't buy this guy as a werewolf because he was too silly and goofy. Cut to this movie, he's once again playing a werewolf, or the Wolfman. This movie came out before Fright Night Part 2, and he's more serious here. I guess I can buy him more in this movie as the Wolfman. I did like the fact that when he was a human, he knew what he was and wanted to prevent it, tried to get himself locked up by the cops, and he just kept coming back and couldn't control it. So I like that. When he does turn into the Wolfman, like there is one shot when he's in the phone booth and you see his face like physically turn into a werewolf, and it looks great, especially for 1987. The special effects were made by Stan Winston, and any time Stan Winston can do effects for any movie, really, but especially horror and just the practicalness, it looks perfect. It looks great. When the Wolfman was in full-fledged wolf garb and the mask, and that's when it looked silly. That's when it looked a little, I don't want to say cheap, because it is what it is, but that's when it took me out of it just a little bit. The premise is interesting. Is it silly? Is it unbelievable? Sure, of course, but a lot of 80s movies, you don't really think so much about how realistic is the plot. You just think of how likable are these characters, how interesting is the plot, how different is it, how original is it, and what could they do with it. Horror movies, especially here, was more about Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers, and people weren't really thinking about the original guys. So what can you do to freshen things up and try to present them in a way that was fun and enjoyable? I think for the most part, this succeeded in all of that. I think this movie works. I think it works a lot more than it doesn't. I can understand if some people maybe don't care for this or think it's too silly or whatever, but it was fun. The main kid, Sean, I liked him. I liked all of these kids, really. So, guys, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of The Monster Squad? I surprisingly enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later! Please won't you save my desires on fire. Sometimes you need a little peace at home. I'm tired, so wired. Come follow me and I can use you. Come follow me and take a trip to